One.
Welcome to HBTV. I'm the HB, Harry Binswanger, in HBTV. I'm a philosopher who advocates Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. The last few weeks I've been doing a series on free will. I raised a question at the end of last time, which is an objection, raised as an objection to the objectivist theory, an objection to the objectivists, that's the correct thing, theory of free will, and I want to answer that today. So it comes under the heading of the influence of social environment on beliefs, values, and character generally. I said last week that character is the moving average of a person's way of acting in moral terms. It's his characteristic, that's where it means the same thing, it comes from. It's his characteristic way of acting. It's what's normal for him, it's what's in character for him with regard to moral choices. And I wanted to share my screen to read a quote from Leonard Peikoff in his lectures, Philosophy of Objectivism. And I hope you can see that. Dylan, can they see that?
They sure can.
Okay. I'm going to read it, but I thought it'd be good to have it on screen because it's a little long. Character means a man's nature or identity, insofar as this is shaped by the moral values he accepts and automatizes. By moral values, I mean values which are volitionally chosen, volition meaning free will, and which are fundamental, i.e. shape the whole course of a man's action, not merely a specialized, delimited area of his life. Then he summarizes. So a man's character is, in effect, his moral essence, his self-made identity as expressed in the principles he lives by. So to live a certain way sets up certain habits. And although morality deals with the freely chosen, you have in the background the choices that you have made in your life up to now. Those provide a context for the moral choices you now face. For instance, I'm sure that you would not be able to jab a pencil into your eye right now. I don't know if you're trying, but I hope not. A person cannot do just anything because his choice is to go by his conscious, rational judgment or something less than that, something where he's drifting, something where he's letting his emotional urges take over. But even when your emotional urges take over, there's no attraction to jabbing a pencil into your eye. So the choices, the range of choice that you face is delimited by the way you've lived your life up till now. So a person who's lived quite honestly his whole life is not going to be tempted to pickpocket a man's wallet when he has the opportunity. His automatized moral values do not make that an issue for him in the present. Now, what might be an issue? Because there's something an issue. Oh, am I going to stick at this task a little longer when it's unpleasant? Or am I going to indulge myself and take a break, even though I know I shouldn't, where he really knows he shouldn't? Or I'm on a diet, but that pound cake looks so delicious. Well, it's the weekend. I'll have it. Now, well, it's the weekend is a rationalization. So this is the kind of thing he might face as a choice. A good man, a man whose character is to do the right thing in all situations. He faces a choice. Am I going to accept that rationalization, or since it feels a little phony to me, it's the weekend, am I going to look at that? An in focus, rational, moral person in that moment looks at that reasoning. Now, we don't know how it will go. Maybe he will decide conscientiously by his best, yeah, it is the weekend, and I starved myself all week, so I've earned it. More likely, the way I set it up, he will say, no, that's a rationalization. That doesn't justify. No, I'm going to stick to what my intention is and not have the pound cake. So little choices at the margin between what is you would do if you were fully in focus and what your emotions might urge you to do if you dropped focus, which will not be to jab something in your eye or rob a bank or go running naked through the streets. It's going to be a limited area of your choice. But each time you make that choice, you move the stakes either higher or lower. That is, having given in to the pound cake, no, let's assume that he shouldn't have. That he went out of focus, accepted the rationalization, and had the pound cake. If he doesn't review that, he can correct it. If he reviews and says, no, I shouldn't have done that. He's weakened his character. He's more likely to do something like that again. And as he does, he's going to be able to do a more serious wrong. On the other hand, to the extent that he chooses to stay in focus and go by his judgment, it will be more natural to him, and he won't be tempted by irrational things, because he will have strengthened his moral muscle, so to speak. Now, I don't want to give the impression that morality is about resisting temptation. It's just that the temptation to give these temptation examples is irresistible. Morality is about telling you how you can be happy and successful and glad you took one road rather than the other. It's not what the Christians made of it. A series of thou shalt nots, a series of old school marm wagging her finger at you and saying, no, no, no. It's saying, yes, yes, yes. Take this road because in the full context, this is the road to accomplishment, achievement, self-respect, happiness, your life. It advances your life. So I take my examples from temptation, but the purpose of morality is to, in Ayn Rand's phrase, teach you to enjoy yourself and live. But you get the idea that you have certain habits of acting in a certain way. You have certain connections in your brain so that certain things seem appealing or don't seem appealing. To some people, narcotics seems appealing. Not to me, it inspires horror in me. To some people, it was Sally Fields getting the Academy Award. You like me. You really like me. Remember that from about 15 years ago? So to some people, unqualified approval from people outside is a tremendous rush for them. For other people, it's nice, but doesn't have any particular meaning because of the values that they have automatized. So now we can confront the question. I've set it up. The question I raised at the end of last time was, if what I've been saying about you run your own life through your own choices, you're a self-made person in regard to your character, if that's true, why do we just look around and see So many Catholics are children of Catholics. So many Baptists are children of Baptists. So many Islamists are children of Islamists. There's even stereotypes of national character. So many Brits are repressed, and so many Italians gesture with their hands. Of course, not all in any case, but how do we explain if you are an independent being who forges your own character, the fact that these correlations are real? The answer is one way of looking at the choice to focus your mind and think or not is to be independent or dependent. You face a choice of thinking for yourself or merely regurgitating what's been heard in your environment in which people tried to get you to believe, your parents, your teachers. If you choose to conform, you will conform. If you don't think about the issue of religion, you're very likely to adopt the religion of your parents and subculture. But you have the choice. And I'm sure many of the listeners out there, since you're motivated enough to listen to this show, have rejected the religion that you were raised in. I know I have. It's not true that national character types have to be there. You can make yourself into the kind of person you want to be with the mannerisms and gestures and emotional openness or whatever that you want. But most people don't make the effort. So what this tells us sounds very bad. Most people are irrational. But I wouldn't endorse it in that way, because it's irrational to conform, right? You're not thinking, you're conforming. But there's a subtlety to this whole thing that makes it less upsetting. The real truth is that most people are rational in the areas that they understand and deal with in a day-to-day way, and are not terribly deep or philosophical or abstract. So you won't find that most children use the same brand of computer or cereal or whatever that their parents did. There might still be some, residual correlation between, say, Mac users and parents who are Mac users. But it's not going to be anything like the 98%, to make up a number, of Catholics who were raised Catholic. The car that you buy. I bought a Mercedes. My parents never had Mercedes. And I'm sure you have the same experience. So when it's concrete and you can easily judge for yourself, and it's not in a field you've written off as, well, who knows, most people have common sense. Most people are pretty rational. It's as you mount the scale of abstraction that people give up. So how many people do you know who would sit down at age 16, 18, 20 and think, I've got to decide which religion, if any, is right? I can't just assume that my parents knew that. There's like hundreds of religions. Was I just lucky that I was born into the right one? I have to look at various religions, and maybe the whole issue of religion is wrong. Maybe there is no God. I have to look at what the facts are about that, and the arguments and the history and the different cultures and so, and come to a determination of my own. Well, very few do that. Very few. Because it's hard. It's not as hard as some people imagine it to be, but it's a little scary to some people for reasons we'll get into. So you'll find that on the concrete things, people are pretty rational. Where it's on the level of common sense, they're pretty rational. As you get to the more and more abstract, very few people think about it. Now, if you don't think about it, what are you going to do? You're going to accept something that you heard. You have to have an answer. Are you going to church? The family's going to church this Sunday. Are you going? Now, I suppose the person is old enough to make his own decision. He's 22, graduated from college. Are you going? Now, the answer has to be yes or no. So he either has to act religious, which will set up certain habits of acceptance, or he has to say no. And if he hasn't thought through on his own, what is the basis for saying no? Well, I can imagine somebody says he doesn't like it. But take that kid, like my first objection was that it interfered with baseball. I wanted to play baseball. I didn't want to have to go sit and... If that's all you got, you get to adulthood, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel the right thing to do would have been to have gone to synagogue, but I played baseball. And you're going to make sure your children go. So you don't get away scot-free with some... I'm getting some error messages here that momentarily suggests that I'm losing audio and regaining it, but I don't know if that's a false error message or you have audio difficulties. So Ayn Rand wrote a book to answer the question I posited. Why does social environment have such an effect on some people, on most people? And that book is called The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead is the story of different kind of lives. The life of the person she called the first-hander, who lives by his own judgment, his own mind, his own thinking, his own work. And the second-hander, who borrows, who parasitizes, who conforms, who lives second-hand through the opinions of others. More formally, in objectivism, it came to be called social metaphysics, and that's a deeper understanding of why children of religion X are much more likely to be in religion X, and particularly the other way around. Most people in religion X were raised in that religion. Social metaphysics means people become reality for you. Well, hopefully not you, for him, for this guy. The guy who has this problem in social metaphysics treats other people's say-so as equivalent to fact. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of reality. So social metaphysics says reality is people. What people think and want and say, that's all there is. There are no facts beyond that. That is ultimate reality. That's the kind of view of life and existence that you develop if you conform. You set up a habit of referring to other people's ideas, their thoughts, their say-so, rather than thinking things through for yourself. They say becomes equivalent to it is. You know the saying, 40 million Frenchmen can't be wrong? It's dated, I guess, but that was widely said, and the idea that society could be wrong, that masses and masses of people could be wrong, is unthinkable to a person who's lived his life by conforming to other people. So the degree of social metaphysics, of parasitism of ideas and values that you see is frightening on the highest level of abstraction. So people's ideas about God, right and wrong, politics, economics. I'm tempted to say physics and math because most people don't, study it firsthand, but that's kind of irrelevant. We're talking about the things that affect your life. Most people's view of things in now in gender and race relations and so forth are just picked up secondhand as social metaphysics, as well they say. I was in a meeting yesterday where one of the people was attacking Anthony Fauci, who you may or may not like. I really don't know myself. But he held up a book and says, here's the real Anthony Fauci. This is it. It's in the book. Well, why is that an expression of the truth about Anthony Fauci? All these books, of course, are written either pro or con with an axe to grind because they want to sell. And maybe they have convictions as well. So if you read one side's book, I'm not saying don't read books, but you have to read the opposite side's books too and think about it and weigh it. Does this make sense? The whole issue of being in focus and being independent is, do you go by your considered judgment or something less than that? A snap judgment, a feeling is a snap judgment. So to go by your feelings, your hunches, your intuitions, is to go by whatever your subconscious throws up without inspecting its validity, asking if they're counterexamples, checking where did I hear that, where did I get that idea, what does it relate to in concrete reality. So independence is a corollary of rationality. There's no such thing as being rational while committing the fallacy of appeal to majority or appeal to experts. To think is to think for yourself. Now, you may be wondering, but how can a little child who doesn't know philosophy, doesn't know logic, doesn't know any of this, how can a little child think for himself in the face of all the pressure from his parents and culture? Very easily. What's the problem? Well, I've been told the child is helpless, he's dependent, he needs his parents, and they inculcate in him their own values. No, determinism is false. That is not what happens. What happens is his parents assert things to him, and then he either thinks about them or he doesn't. Well, how can a little 4-year-old think about things his parents say? He can, on the scale open to him. For instance, I know a 4-year-old who asked, if God created everything, who created God? Now that's thinking. And children around that age go through a process of asking why. Why? You tell them the why, they would know why that, and why that, and why that. And they're using their minds They haven't yet given up. That is the proper attitude. The idea that the child, from our perspective, is a helpless dependent physically, on the parents. They can't go out and get a job. But from the child's perspective, he doesn't feel like a helpless dependent. Compared to what? He's not, the 2-year-old isn't thinking, oh my God, I can't go out into the supermarket and buy my own food and cook it because I can barely walk. So I'm really dependent on my parents. I better make sure they like me so I'll get fit. That's bizarre. Children take their situation for granted because they have nothing else to compare it to. A normal child does not feel dependent. A normal child is not swayed by the emotional insistence of his parents that he believes something. I know my parents tried to get me to believe a lot of things that I didn't believe. I guess at first I believed in Santa Claus, but once you learn that they were kidding in that, it leads you to question other things like God. So it's true that a person who is a social metaphysician does feel that the power of other people's agreement, approval, or whatever, but you're not born that way. You become that way if you parasitize. If you parasitize, let me not make it black and white, to the extent that someone parasitizes and doesn't think for himself, he does feel inadequate to know the truth, and he has made himself dependent upon the other people say so, so he very much needs to know they approve of him. But that's due to his own wrong choices. It's not built in. So sometimes people ask, how did Ayn Rand have the strength to morally condemn her mother for certain actions that the mother took when she was 4 or 5, 6? How does an individual have the strength to overcome the pulls and pushes of society? And that's wrong. It doesn't take any strength. The individualist doesn't feel any pulls and pushes from society. He is independent. The only person whose approval he desperately needs is his own. And if he concludes something through the use of his thinking, and somebody else damns that, his conclusion is, well, what's wrong with that guy? He obviously can't think straight. I mean, you might ask, well, what's wrong with my argument for this, which is A, B, C, D? And even a little child, you run this part experiment through your mind. So little Johnny is 6 years old, and he's at the dinner table, and he says, I've been thinking, if God created everything, who created God? And the enraged father reaches out across the table, Waps, don't ever open your mouth to me with that again, that blasphemy. You're going to go to hell. Does that have the slightest tendency to make little Johnny think, that his question has been answered? Nope. It's, of course, very upsetting, extremely upsetting. And it may be hours or days before little Johnny, in the privacy of his own mind, is able to review the situation and decide what was going on there. But if he does, he'll conclude, my father's bad. He shouldn't have hit me. He himself says I shouldn't hit people. All I did was ask a question. There's nothing wrong in asking a question. My mind needs to know. He didn't answer my question. He didn't say anything to answer that question. My question is still unanswered. My father is bad. But of course, if you don't review the situation, if you don't think, if you just, another little child just collapses in fear and pain and which both of them would feel. But one of them gives in to it and never thinks about the topic again. The other one thinks about it, just doesn't open his mouth to his father again. That's the difference. So it doesn't take any strength. All it takes is curiosity. Why did he do that? What is the answer to my question? Now, I said, ironically, this also explains the opposite, why parents don't have complete power over the individual, the child. The parent has over the child the power that the child cedes to the parent by his own unadulterated free will choice. The choice to be a thinking, independent person or not lies with the little child. And it's not just on one event, it's every day, every moment of every day. So paradoxically, the parent can't make the child independent either. He can't make the child stop thinking and make him obedient. And he can't make the child start thinking and be independent. He can assist, but the choice remains with the child. There's no such thing as I decide everything regardless of what my parents think one way or the other because that's the way my parents brought me up to be. That's a straight contradiction. So parents have to realize that children have free will, and whether they turn out to be thinkers or non-thinkers is up to them, not up to the parent. Now, there is another important historical corollary of what I've been saying, but we are at the end of our time and a little beyond. Dylan, do we have any questions on this topic in the chat?
We have Eric who asks, is widespread imposter syndrome a function of second-handed orientation?
Well, dogmatically, off the top of my head as an armchair theorist, yes. Now there's some slight basis for imposter, but not enough to call it syndrome. So if you get a big promotion at work and you're put in a position of responsibility and it happens fast, you might feel a little trepidation. Can I do this? I've never done this before. I've always been at a lower level, which I knew I can handle, but I don't know if I can handle this other stuff. Well, that's not imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when you get into the position and you're carrying out the functions, you feel like a fraud. You feel like I'm not really the vice president. I'm just posing as the vice president. I couldn't be the vice president because I have too much self-doubt. Let's put it this way. It may not be specifically due to social metaphysics, although I think most of the time it is, but it's due to self-doubt. A person who knows that he has the ability is not going to feel imposter syndrome. And a person who knows, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, knows how to get the ability. I once saw an interview with a friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger who said, Arnie knows how to learn. He learned how to learn. And if you've got that ability that you have to develop for yourself, you're not going to feel, even when you don't have the skills, you're going to think, well, I can get them. But you wouldn't feel like an imposter. So something very wrong. It's not like a natural condition of the human species that a person will feel, I'm a fraud waiting to be found out. That's his own view of himself that's speaking. Was that the only question relating to this?
Yes, sir. That was it.
Good. Okay, so we can stop approximately on time, and next time I'll take up several further topics on free will. I hope, if you've been watching this series, you're starting to see what a rich topic this is. It isn't what people imagine it is when they come into it. Well, are you self-responsible or not? Yes, no, the end. No, it's a huge area of psychological and philosophical content to be understood and mastered. See you next week on HBTV.